Good morning. We're mid-June and I decided it was time to give you a little vintage report, and so that share with you a little bit how the 2013 vintage is coming along. We had a very wet and cold spring which delayed bud break by about 2 weeks, and the beginning of April and May were also very cold and wet. So right now, mid-June, we can say that we were about 2 weeks behind a normal vintage. We're anticipating to start the harvest in September rather than August like we usually do with the first Viogniers. The number of clusters on Grenache was astronomical, and I was a little worried about the quantity, the just sheer quantity of grapes that we will have and the amount of crop thinning we'll have to do. Fortunately, the bloom happened in a fairly rainy weekend, and there is some substantial shattering in the clusters, which is great because it lightens the load and also spaces out the berries. And let's take a look at a young Grenache vineyard. So you can see the quantity of cluster is pretty large. Okay, this is a fourth leaf, so a fairly young vineyard, and typically young vineyards tend to have a excessive load. And then let's get closer to a cluster. So you have this particular cluster that appears to be very full with berries. Actually, it's still in the early stage of development, and shattering, which is basically the fruit that aborts, has not happened. And now let's move to a little further, a cluster that's a little further advanced. As you can see, it's already much lighter, and if I just do this, make sure that everything that will abort aborts, you can see that the cluster is much thinner. This is shattering, and it is very typical of Grenache as a varietal. Sometimes it is responsible for a very light crop. 210 was a good example of that. Right now in 2013, it looks like it's very welcome given the sheer number of clusters that came out this year. So that's for this update. Stay tuned and we'll try to give you more in the coming weeks.